Hello and welcome to the Tough Girl Podcast, a 3-time award-winning show that aims to motivate and inspire you while increasing the amount of female role models in the media, especially in relation to adventure and physical challenges. I'm your host, Sarah Williams. If you're passionate about adventure, challenge and learning from women who have overcome obstacles and achieved remarkable things, then this is the podcast for you. Every Tuesday at 7 a.m, new episodes go live featuring incredible women who share their stories, insights and tips to help you achieve your dreams and goals. You can support the Tough Girl mission by signing up as a patron. Visit Patreon, patreon.com/Tough Girl Podcast. Keep listening until the very end as I share more information about what's going on with me with Tough Girl Challenges, give shout outs and recommend other Tough Girl Podcast episodes. More information can be found at toughgirlchallenges.com.
My name is Jo Moseley. I'm 59. I'm a single mum of 2 now grown-up sons in their mid to late 20s. I'm based in Yorkshire and I am a paddleboarder, and I have just released my second book about paddleboarding, and both of them are bestsellers, which is lovely. And I also have a podcast, which I'm going to refresh now that the books are done, all about women who paddleboard. And I made tiny little films about paddleboarding, or I have in the past. So
we have actually spoken to you before. We were sort of reminiscing before we started the podcast. So we spoke at the very beginning, probably of like 2020, and the episode came out on May 19th. And in that episode, you shared more about your life, being a single mum, your 2 sons, going through the divorce. You talked about the loss of your mum, the amazing charity work that you did to raise, over £10,000 for charity. You also shared more about your experience with perimenopause and menopause and how exercise helped. So we're almost going to jump, to be honest. So if you want, please do go back and listen to that episode. It's an absolute cracker. Love it. But Jo, I almost want to just jump into 2020, which I can't believe we're in 2024 now, actually. I don't know. I don't know where the time has gone. But, what were you up to during 2020? What happened to you during the COVID years? What were you focusing on? Take us back to that time.
So I had finished 2019 on quite a high. So I paddleboarded coast to coast in the summer of that year. And I was starting to share with everybody that I'd paddleboard coast to coast. Frit Tam of Frit Films was making the film Brave Enough, A Journey Home to Joy. And I was thinking 2020 is going to be an exciting year. I'm going to build on everything that I've done. And I was coming through the menopause. I had realized that actually just a month after I'd completed the coast to coast in August 2019, that I was then officially menopausal. So a lot of my perimenopausal symptoms were sort of easing. So everything was looking quite rosy. Then obviously we went into COVID and I was working from home. One of my sons came home from uni. And I was really cautious and worried about COVID. My natural default position is worried, but I was like, we can't go out for any more than half an hour. We'll save it till 5 o'clock, And then in the summer of 2020, I started thinking that I'd like to write a book about paddleboarding, because interestingly, I read a book about paddleboarding in that summer, and there was some quite sort of sexist comments about, it was an American book, quite sexist comments about women who paddleboarded and bikinis, and it might not look like she's strong, but she is. And it was sort of real backhanded kind of comments. And I kept saying to my son, I really think we need to write a book about paddleboarding in this country. And he just kept saying, Mum, just do it and stop talking about it. So then in the September, October 2020, I pitched my first book about paddleboarding. So that time in COVID, when I had a bit more time to think about things, was really the foundation for writing my first book.
And so did you start writing it there and then? Or did you come up with a pitch?
Yeah, so I came up with a pitch, which was actually, because I was so I don't normally get very angry about anything, but I just was sort of rattled by this guy. So I actually created a pitch for some publishers, and it was sort of like Tough Girl Challenges, but for paddleboarding, it was like stories of women who paddleboarded. And I had pitched books before in the past, and they'd said, no, it's not right for us, but we like your style of writing, so keep going. So I pitched these books, and one publisher said no. And then my publisher, I did it at the same time. And one publisher said no, because we're bringing out another paddleboarding book and we can't do 2. And I was like, fine. And my publisher said, we're super interested in the paddleboarding side of things, but not necessarily the book you pitched. Would you be interested in writing a travel paddleboarding book? And I knew at that time that I had one opportunity. I could either stick to my idea for dear life and say, no, I only want to write this book. And then they might have said, well, bye. Or I could say, yes, of course I can do that. And I just thought, yes, I can do that. I can write a travel guide. And then I kind of came off the phone and went, how do I write a travel guide? This is not what I expected. But I just knew that you had to sort of seize that moment of opportunity. And so I signed the contract to write a travel book, but we were then in lockdown. I don't know what it was, 3 and 4 or whatever. So in that time, as a way to meet women and men through paddleboarding so that when we could come out of lockdown, I started my own podcast, The Joy of Sup, the Paddleboarding Sunshine podcast, met incredible people. I only interview women, met incredible women, sort of discovered the world from my lounge and my home. And when we were allowed to then start traveling in May 2021, I was then like ready to go and meet these incredible people to go and paddleboard with and share their stories in the book. So my books include stories as well as where to launch, where to exit, where to get your cups of tea and coffee, public transport, campsites and things, and all the safety stuff. So I sort of incorporated what I'd originally wanted into a travel guide. But, it was a few months into 2021 before I was actually allowed to go out and start researching on the water.
There's a couple of things there. It's one, it's saying yes to that opportunity, being flexible about it. And it's the fact, starting a podcast, the Joy of Sup podcast is absolutely an incredible thing to do because you're having these amazing conversations with people who are really passionate about the things that you love. And actually, from one of the main benefits that I've definitely had from the podcast is becoming friends, with so many of the women that I interview. And then it's strange actually, because sometimes I meet women who maybe like years later who I've interviewed, and it's like I'm just catching up with a best friend, a best mate.
Yeah.
It's a great way to connect with other people, to have these wonderful conversations, which then can be feed into the book. So then actually you're not having like a cold start when you're like, oh, where do I start with this? Because you already had these great conversations. And so, take us back to, I suppose, like May 2021. Were you just sort of like reaching out to your previous guests that you'd had on the podcast, going out there? Like, how did you write the stand-up paddleboarding in Great Britain, like your travel book?
Thank you. So basically from about December to May, I was interviewing people and starting to, so basically I was interviewing people that seemed interesting. They had to have an interesting story. And then I found out where they lived and thought, oh yeah, that could be good. And then I had a massive map of the country because I went to over 30 places around the country and I had a massive map and I knew that I wanted to include all types of bodies of water. So, the coast, canals, lochs, lakes, estuaries, salt marshes, harbours, docks, the sea, obviously. And I tried to sort of find someone interesting that was on the podcast or that I could interview for the podcast, but also so that when I met them on the shoreline, we had something interesting to talk about. I knew their backstory. I knew that we would paddle well together. And so, I just went around the country and went to all these different places. Some of the people, particularly obviously the chaps that I met to paddleboard with, like, Craig Jackson, who was on the River Severn, he wasn't on my podcast. So I'd sort of followed him and thought, yeah, he sounds like a really interesting chap and he's really passionate about the River Severn. So I'll paddle with him. But then others like Kaz Dawson or, Sarah Blues, it was like they've got really great stories about Wales or Dorset or plus size paddling or whatever. And so I just met these amazing people, incorporated it into the book, and then did all the other stuff, like, as I say, all the logistical stuff about launching and transport and parking and safety. So it was terrifying and exciting at the same time. It was like anything. Because it's the first book that's dedicated to paddleboarding. So I only include paddleboarding. Other books have got kayaking and canoeing, which are great. But it was the only one at the time and still is that's dedicated to paddleboarding. So there was like a massive learning curve all the time. I was doing the things, but also having to think at the same time, what do people want to know about doing the thing? You know, what is it that will make them feel confident about going to that place? What information do I need to give them? So yeah, it was a massive learning curve for me, the whole thing.
And did you actually have to put it all together? Because there's stunning, photos in the book, and there's maps, there's so much information. Did you have to create all of that, or is that something that you did with the publisher?
So the publishers are Vertebrate Publishing, and they have different series of travel books. And this is one based on a really brilliant book called Swimming Wild in the Lake District by Susanna Cruikshank. And so they were going to slot my book into a template, which is a sort of story at the beginning. Susanna writes stories, but she doesn't write them quite as sort of rose tinted glasses as I do, and sort of, oh, this is amazing. But she has a story at the beginning, and then the launch points and all the other stuff. So we followed that format to a certain degree, and I would write the story, and then I would just give them all the information. And particularly with the second book, it was like, Joe, we cannot I would know the code for the Ringo car parking app. And they're like, we can't put all that much detail in. But yeah, I would provide all the information, and then we'd slot it into this template and then sort of personalize it to my style. For the first book, I did probably 90 to 95% of the photos just on my iPhone. With the second book, we had a professional photographer. So I did the photos on the water and he did the photos on the land, and his are out of this world. I mean, they're just stunningly amazing. But yeah, so there was a certain template, and then once I had sent him my draft manuscript, there was the editing process. They didn't edit my stories that much, but they edit the logistical stuff just to make sure it's absolutely tip top and I've got everything completely right.
So I know that you were going out there, you've got this big map of the UK, visiting sort of 30 places throughout the year. What was one of your favorite places? The one which you would think, I'd definitely go back there. That's in my top 3, top 5.
Oh gosh. So my very favorite place is where my dad lives, but I can go there anyway. I think one of the places that I always remember, and I think it struck a chord with a lot of people, was in Scotland, and it was an island called Great Cumbrae. I think that's how you say it. And obviously in Scotland, you have the responsible right to roam, so you can sleep on the beaches. And a friend of mine, Lynn van der Zanden, I had come from Oban where it had, and then I'd been on Mull, and it had just rained and rained and rained and rained. And I was just like, oh God, this is just like windy and rain. And I'd had a lovely day in Oban, and then a really sort of couldn't paddle on Mull. And then it just was raining. I spent one day almost in bed at this Airbnb, just sort of in the rain and just kind of recuperating. And she said, look, we can go out on the Sunday and battle through the winds, or we can wait till Monday when the wind forecast looks amazing. So I said, right, let's do the Monday. And we met at a place called Porton Cross Castle, which is the last resting place or believed to be the last resting place of the kings of Scotland before their bodies were taken to Iona. And we paddled past this little island. The sea was flat calm. We saw starfishes and sea urchins. We saw dolphins and porpoises, the sunset, and then we slept on the beach. We slept on the beach on our boards, and we had a lovely supper of pasta pesto and pine nuts, and then we drank peppermint tea and ate chocolate as the sun set, and then slept on our boards, and then set off back in the morning. And, I was going back to England because I think I was going down to Cornwall straight after that. And she was going to go and pick her daughter up from school. We had probably 18 hours together, but it was just incredibly special. And I think having had all that rain and the forecast being so horrible for the Sunday we were due to paddle, and then having this magnificent day, was just a very, very special time. And, sleeping on your paddleboard on a beach, you can't really beat that.
That sounds incredible. One of the things that you do, and one of the things that you talk about as well, is sharing the joy of aging well. You're 59 now. When will you be turning 60, and how are you feeling about that?
Great question. So the end of December, just after Christmas, I'll be 60. And I'm kind of mentally preparing myself because I think I want to embrace it. And I think I am optimistic and hopeful and positive, but it does feel, all my friends who are 60 say it's fine. It's just like a hurdle you get through and then you realize everything's just the same and everything's fine. But for me, there is a little bit of like, whoa, I was only 25 about 5 minutes ago. How did I get to be 60? Because it is quite a big number when you start thinking about, oh, I can get a senior person's rail card, or, it's like, oh, that's a good idea. So I'm doing a little challenge where I do a headstand a day, until I'm 60. And I started that in March last year. So I do a headstand a day, and I think about being 60 and listen to podcasts, and I just want it to be a really positive new chapter. I think I'm doing a lot of decluttering at home. I'm planning about different things. So I just want it to be a really positive thing. And I deliberately following women on Instagram, for example, who are making the most of their 60s, and they're not necessarily making the most of it because they have loads of money. They're just doing things that are interesting and exciting. So yeah, I do feel positive about it. And now that I am postmenopausal, so many of those symptoms that were sort of breaking me really during my early 50s, they just calmed down. And so it just feels like a much more positive time.
June 2022, your childhood dream came true with your first book being published. And that hasn't stopped you, because I know that you've been incredibly busy, and you mentioned at the start that your second book has been published. Massive congratulations.
Thank you.
Would you like to share more about your second book, the title,
thank you.
What it covers off?
It's so it's with the same publishers, and they took another leap of faith with me and said, yep, we like the first book. It's doing super well. Would you like to write a book about paddleboarding in the Lake District? And the Lake District means a lot to me because it was the place I had my first lesson. So the book is called Stand Up Paddleboarding in the Lake District, Beautiful Places to Paddleboard in Cumbria. And it covers the 10 lakes that we're allowed to paddleboard on, and a lot more detail than the first book in terms of, I also offer, campsites and youth hostels and things to do if the weather just isn't on your side and you want to take the family to the Keswick Pencil Museum or a castle or something like that. So they commissioned me to write that in October 22. Yeah. And I handed it in a year later, November 23. I usually am about 3 or 4 weeks late, but they're okay with that. So the Lake District really is a place that's very special because that's where I took my very first paddleboarding lesson on the 24th of September, 2016 on Derwent Water near Nickel Marine, which is in the northwest of Derwentwater. And it transformed my life, paddleboarding. I always say it's the first time for months that I felt like a warrior, not a worrier. I stick by that. That's how I feel every time I go on my board. And so it was really special. And coincidentally, the very last research chapter of the first book was on Ullswater. So it felt like we were kind of handing the baton from one book to another. It was like, you finished on Ullswater. What's next? And this time I go into many more places on Ullswater that you can paddle. So yeah, last spring, summer, autumn, and into a bit of winter, although the research had been done by October, we did some photo shoots in the winter, which was amazing because the light on a wintry day is just stunning, and just really in a lot more detail about places to paddleboard and enjoy in the Lake District. And I don't know if you recall, but the weather last year was great in May and June, almost too great. It got really sunny, very, very dry. There were lots of reports of worries of fires around the Lake District where people left barbecues or whatever, and it was like a tinderbox. And then it started raining, and then it didn't really stop. So I was sort of like really dodging the weather. I spent the whole of last year checking the weather forecast for the Lake District. I think the Met Office thought I was just stalking them. But yeah, so the book came out last week. It's doing really, really well, getting lots of lovely comments and reviews and sales. And lots of people that bought the first book have come back to buy another book because they like the stories that I write. So yeah, very, very lucky, very lucky.
And it did also reach number one in what was the category?
In kayaking and canoeing on Amazon. So you never know what the sales are like in bookshops until later, but that gives you a bit of an idea if people are enjoying it. So Amazon's just sort of one place a lot of people do get it. Obviously, you can buy it in great independent bookshops and Waterstones and Smiths and bookshop.org, but Amazon, and also from my publishers, but Amazon is one way you can gauge how well it's doing. So yeah.
So you said something of interest about paddleboarding on 10 lakes. Why only 10 lakes? Can you not just take your paddleboard to any of the lakes in the Lake District?
No, because some of them are sites of a special scientific interest. So the National Trust or whatever don't want you to paddleboard on them. And some are owned by United Utilities, the water company, and they will only allow kayaking and canoeing, not paddleboarding. Or there's one called Haweswater, which is an RSPB nature reserve, and they don't allow paddleboarding. So no, there's just the 10. But some of them are so big, like Ullswater or Windermere. I can't remember how many places on Windermere I have as launch points, but a lot. You know, it took me a summer of dedicated research to get through them. So I think there's still plenty, and they're all very different. You've got little ones like Grasmere and Loweswater, and then you've got sort of Windermere, which is obviously the longest lake in England, and you've got Wastwater, which is the deepest. So, yeah, you can't paddle everywhere, but there's plenty still.
One of the things that I've been seeing a lot of or hearing a lot about is unfortunately the amount of sewage that is impacting the UK waterways at the moment. And how does that impact stand-up paddleboarding? You know, what are your thoughts? What are your concerns? What are you trying to do to help, like, not that you can solve this problem, but raise but you know,
no,
big ask, but to raise awareness about that.
Absolutely. So when I paddleboarded coast to coast, that was on the canals. So I picked up litter and talked about plastic pollution, and that was sort of 5 years ago. And in the first book, I talk about pollution as well, and I talk about different organizations. And I also talk about how we can be environmentally conscious of dolphins, of breeding and nesting sites for birds and things like that. And I talk again about particularly fish spawning, gravel beds and birds where they nest on different islands in the Lake District. In terms of pollution, I have a professor of sort of water science. He gives me lots of great advice. And I basically I said, look, this is a problem. You will have seen it. These are the things you need to look out for with blue-green algae. These are if you see this, then these are the dangers, and you have to judge for yourself whether you want to paddle in that area or on that lake. Because it isn't like the whole of Windermere are certain spots at certain times. So I try and give people all the information they need for them to decide, because for some it's like, I don't want to go anywhere near that. But for others, it's like, well, I'm not likely to fall in. And if I do paddle there, like, for example, I suggest you carry hand sanitizers, and, you certainly cover any cuts so that if any water is splashed. And I talk a lot about check, clean, dry, which is not taking any invasive non-native species. So I try and give people as much information as they can, and I give them links to organizations that are trying to make a difference. So, for example, on Sunday this weekend, I'm going up to Windermere to work with the Freshwater Biological Association. I'm going to go out on my paddleboard and do water sample testing. And so they can then also do it from a scientific point of view to then feed into the research about what is actually happening. So I don't shy away from it, but I give people the information to say, look, if we're going to paddleboard, we need to be responsible both for our own health, but also for the health of the lakes, and, treat them responsibly, treat them with thought and consideration in terms of, there's a whole big chapter about how to go to the toilet in the Lake District when there aren't toilets around the lake. People might expect, say if you paddle, on a beach, there might be lifeguards and there might be some toilets in the resort. And that just isn't the case on some of the lakes. So I try and give them all the information and tips that will just make them aware of what's happening and be responsible as paddleboarders as well.
Is it responsible? Because I would pee in my wetsuit if I was in the lake. Is that not good? Am I creating a problem with algae?
I know that people do.
I don't know how you can't. It's like,
Yeah. Well, I think there's that. I think actually when you go into cold water, there is actually, I did read it somewhere. I will have to find it. There is a bit of a reaction in your body that makes you want to go for a wee. I think there's obviously one person, I mean, I don't want to get in trouble with this, but one person doing one little wee probably compared to the infrastructure that needs really looking after, they're not quite the same things, and you have to focus on what's going to make the bigger difference if we get the infrastructure right for the hotels and the farming and all that, and the actual sewerage system. But for the toileting as well, it's as much about, you sometimes do see sites where people don't know where to go to the loo, so they will literally go and just leave a poo next to a stream or something. And I think that's probably on a different scale than you just doing a little wee in your wetsuit.
That's why you carry doggy bags.
Yeah, doggy bags. Yeah, exactly. I've got the cooler cloths, the antibacterial microcloths, and I've talked about poo bags and carrying it out. And for some people that might be a bit shocking, but that is so much better than just sort of leaving it in a bush with lots of wet wipes and all that sort of horribleness. So yeah.
Because I would just assume as well, at a minimum, to take your tissue and wet wipes, etc., out in the poo bag, that if you just left your poo, then that's just sort of going back into, but then there's hundreds of people. Oh God.
Yeah. Can you imagine? Yeah. If you can imagine, you think you're the only person.
Yeah. And you're not.
But actually you're not. And what happens is, if it becomes a place that people think, oh, that's where those people do, that's where you go to do it. It isn't one person, it's everybody. And most people are super responsible, and paddleboarders are fairly new to the area relatively new in terms of years rather than decades. Climbers, kayakers, cyclists, swimmers have been going a lot longer than we have as a community. So I just want us to be the community that is well informed, so that people won't say, oh, it's all those paddleboarders. So, well, no, actually, we kind of know what to do. We know not to camp on the shoreline. That is where it's different in Scotland. You're not allowed to camp on the shoreline of the Lake District, except in proper designated campsites, which I have included in the book. So yeah, I just want us to be seen as a responsible community. And I also think my sort of paddleboarding hero, Cal Major, says that if you show people a beautiful place, they will love it and they will look after it. And so I kind of want to show people the beauty of these lakes, because then they will fall in love with them as paddleboarders and do what they can to make a difference. So they'll litter pick, they'll make sure the boards are clean, they'll behave responsibly. They might campaign for, the lakes, or raise funds, or do scientific research. So yeah, I think by seeing how beautiful they are, we can become advocates for them.
Absolutely. And there is that, like, the educational part of it as well, which you are included in your book, like the practical information. Because also sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And if you are brand new, you will look around and be like, oh, well, that's what other people are doing, so it must be okay.
Yeah, exactly. That's 100% Sarah. And that's again with the safety about paddleboarding. Like, I do have this bit. So just because you see someone else out in the water doesn't mean that they're the same level of expertise as you are. So they might be way more expertise than you. So they might be really testing themselves in the wind and have the skills to do that. Or they might not have a clue what they're doing, and they're going to get in trouble in that wind speed. And you have to know the wind speed that's right. I suggest 10 miles an hour, but I do know that there are some highly experienced paddleboarders that will go out when it is faster than that, because they want to test themselves. They're training to be leaders or instructors or coaches. But if you just look from the shoreline and you say, oh, they're all out there, it must be fine for me, you could get yourself in quite a bit of trouble. Or you just look at somebody and say, oh, he's gone out, but actually he only has paddled 2 hours more than you, and he's going to get himself in trouble. So yeah, it's all about education so that you can make informed, knowledgeable, safe decisions about the environment, or about, when to paddle and things like that. So yeah, there's a lot of sort of information in the book, hopefully not in a bossy way, but in a really sort of engaging way.
It will be engaging without a doubt.
Thank you.
So, Joe, you've got your 2 books, you're going to be refreshing the podcast. You're still working. You've got a lot on your plate, turning 60 at the end of the year. How active are you at the moment? Are you managing to get out, do your paddleboarding, do your fitness? How are you making that fit into your life and lifestyle?
Yeah, so I've just been recently made an ordnance surveys champion. I kind of incorporate walking into my day. Like I just needed to go, and with my decluttering, I had some books and some of the books from the boys that they don't want. And I thought, okay, I could just nip up to Oxfam in the car, or I could like pack them in a rucksack and carry them up. And so I knew that would be good. I would get my steps in. It would be, good weight bearing exercise. So I just try and think a little bit more about everyday exercise, like exercise snacks I've got a kettlebell at home, so I don't need to always go to the gym to do something. And paddleboarding, I do try and get out. And I do sometimes have to say to myself, look, you can just shut the laptop and go paddleboarding rather than think, oh, I'll just write one more email. And I do like try and look in my diary and think, right, that afternoon is going to be a paddleboarding afternoon, and not feel guilty about it. My dad lives by the coast, so that's great. I can swim and paddleboard and walk on the beach. I go to skateboarding now. And I think at 60, things do change in your body. I've had friends that go, whoa, there is a bit of a change. So I'm trying to prepare myself, keep my bones and muscles strong for that.
Do you know what I do? Is that I know that when I come back from like my walking, my legs are like super strong, but my upper body is like gone. So every time I walk up the stairs, I stop and do like 15 push-ups.
Brilliant. That's amazing.
I mean, not every time, but also sometimes I'm not going up and down the stairs that often. So it's maybe only like, 45 push-ups a day, and it's on an angle. So it does actually make it that much easier to do. Or if I'm just chatting with mum and dad in the kitchen, I'll do push-ups against the counter. Exactly. Or we'll do like single leg raises or glute activations, which is quite random in our house in the kitchen when people start doing like squats. And we keep our kettlebell in the kitchen as well.
Yeah.
Just so it's visible, and then you can just pick it up, before breakfast, or, you think, oh, well, let's just do a few squats, etc. with it, which is super.
Yeah, and I really like squats, and I find them really good for skateboarding. I squat when I pick up litter, so I really enjoy squats. So I saw somebody on Instagram, and she was doing these sort of squat variations, and I thought, oh, I've never tried that. So when I came home this afternoon, I changed out of my work, my smart work dress and pearls, and put my leggings on, and I thought, oh, I'll just try it, and literally did it for about 4 minutes and thought, I'm going to die at this point, because they were super hard, but it was just an extra little thing. And I've started skipping more, and my mum had osteoporosis, and I don't have osteoporosis. I don't believe I do. I did have a DEXA scan once, but I just do think, right, it obviously runs in the family, so I need to just do some impact. And, you can skip for 2 minutes and be pretty exhausted. I love snacking on food, so now I'm just trying to snack on exercise.
I love it. And one of the things that you sort of slipped into the conversation, but I need to know more about, is the skateboarding. When did you take up skateboarding, and how is it going?
So I have to make sure I don't say the wrong thing, because I've kept saying for the last 4 months, I'm rubbish at it. I am a beginner at skateboarding. That's more positive. So I started in December last year. I handed the book in. We were in full blown editing. And my head was just pounding. And I thought, I want to do something where I can be an absolute beginner. And I've always wanted to skateboard. As a little girl, I, thought I would love to do this, but there was nowhere to get lessons. We didn't have skate parks where I lived. So my brother had a skateboard, but I never had the confidence. So I went for lessons in a skate park in Leeds. And I am improving, I would say, by millimeter after millimeter. We're not talking milestones. We're not even talking inch stones. We're talking millimeter stones. I am improving in my confidence. I can do things I couldn't do before. I love the community. There is a skate park near where I live that now that it's dry, I'm going to start going to. It's an outdoor one, and my instructor says it's a good one, but there are things to be aware of. Whereas in a skate park, you've got instructors there, and you've got kind of safety team and people watching out for you a bit more. So I'm enjoying it. I find it really mindful. I find it really calming because you can't think of anything else. Even with paddleboarding, I can think of other things at the same time, but I can't think of anything else with skateboarding. So it's very focusing on the mind, and you come away thinking, wow, I did something I never thought I could do. And literally that is push a skateboard and not fall off. It's tiny, tiny, tiny little triumphs, but I love it. It's a great community and it's an amazing sport. Amazing sport.
That is absolutely fantastic. It's also sometimes I remember, when was the last time that you did something new for the first time? And I think it's something that I've heard as you get older, it's easier to stay in your comfort zone than it is to try new things because
Absolutely.
you're not going to be great at the start. There's a level of fear. You don't want to embarrass yourself. You don't want to hurt yourself. You don't want to be seen as a failure. As actually to keep the old noggin ticking over and the body moving, you've got to, it's like, what do they say? Like try brushing your teeth with your left hand or whatever. That can fire different neurons in your brain and stuff. So I love the fact that you've done that. I love the fact that you're sharing that on social media. And Joe, like, where are you most active on social media? Where can people follow along?
Mainly Instagram, I think. Now, I've never been that good at Facebook. It confuses me slightly, but I do try and share a bit. So Instagram. So I'm just simply Joe Moseley now. I was Healthy Happy 50. And then when last year, my son literally took my phone off me and he went, right, I'm going to change it. And I was like, no, you can't. And he just went, right, you're Joe Moseley now. So that I can, carry on into my 60s and 70s. So that's JOMOSELEY. But yeah, mainly Instagram, and my website's the same. And yeah, so I'll be refreshing my blogs and my website and the podcast and sort of back to those things now that the book is out in the world and I'm not spending my time checking the forecast.
What's the next adventure? What are you doing for you?
So as part of promoting the book, but also very much for me as well, I'm going to spend different times during the summer taking 3 to 4 days to sort of walk from lake to lake and bookshop to bookshop so that I can dip in the lakes, paddleboard with friends, go to bookshops, which I love, to pick up books to read and promote my own book. I'm going to do a little bit of bivvying outside on the fells because obviously if you're high enough up and you follow the rules, bivvying is wild camping it's not like totally not allowed, if you see what I mean. I would never do it on the shoreline because that's not allowed. So I do a little bit of wild camping. Also, there's some campsites with Camp Wild, which are a little bit more remote, and just really enjoy the Lake District through the summer. Just really enjoy it. Do my headstands on the top of a fell, skip on the shoreline, and just have a really lovely summer. I know so much about the lakes. I want to go and enjoy the book, if you see what I mean. I know the cafes, make sure that I just revisit all the cafes and just revisit all the lovely food that they sell. So
when you said, go from lake to lake, bookshop to bookshop, the thing that I had in my head was then go from cafe to cafe, cake to cake.
Yeah. And I put great places in for cakes, and I have sampled, most of I think every place I've been that's in the book I've been to, but there's no problem going back to these places. I think I should just go and resample things and just meet up with people who have said, oh, I'll be up in the lakes at the same time, or, can I come and meet you? And just make it very chilled, like very, very chilled. Some friends have said I can keep my board a couple of boards at their house, and then I can just get the bus. And so that's very much my kind of holiday, is just enjoying that, and then spending time with my dad at the coast and paddling where he lives. So
that sounds absolutely idyllic and so much fun as well. And also it'd be you can just go like going along and be like, okay, here's my book, here's a photo of me with with the photos in the book and stuff, which will be great.
Yeah, I just want it to be chilled, really relax, and I'll be safe and all that good stuff, but relax and chilled, and just show people just beautiful things, really.
And Joe, I'd love for you to have the final words of advice and wisdom for other women who want to step outside their comfort zone. They want to take on a new habit, whether it's skipping, skateboarding, doing a headstand a day. What advice would you have for them, especially women who are coming into maybe like the next stage of their life, the over 50s, the over 60s, the over 70s? Apart from just do it, what would you like to share? And you can take that in any direction.
I would say start exactly as you are. I know lots of people that will say, oh, I'm not good enough, so I should get good before I go to the gym or something. So I would say start just where you are, start today and start small. Like literally the hardest thing was probably ringing the skate park and saying, is it okay that a 58-year-old mum wants to come and learn to skate? Is that just out of the question? And they were like, come on down, like literally, come on down, and so welcoming. So I think it's taking that very, very first step, either booking a lesson with a swim coach if you want to go outdoor swimming, or finding a swimming community, booking a lesson with a paddleboarding instructor, if you want to learn how to mat read, or just taking that first step is the hardest, but start today, start small. And if you can build a little community around you, whether that's like listening to Tough Girl challenges, you're out there going on a walk and you're listening to someone that's done something and you think, oh, she's just like me. She's just a few years down the road. So build a community online through podcasts and books. And if there are local groups you can go with, join them as well. But just do it for you. I think that's the key, is doing it for you, and what's important to you. That's all that matters. I tried surfing, got injured every time, and thought, this just really isn't for me. And I'm allowed to say it isn't, and I'm going to go back to paddleboarding.
Yeah. It's like me saying, yeah, I'm going to do a cold adventure. Everyone would just laugh and be like, that is not my cup of tea. So find your cup of tea.
Exactly. It's only, it only matters that it brings, that you feel safe and it makes you feel good and it brings you joy. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Joe, thank you for bringing us so much joy. It's been incredible to catch up with you. Congratulations on all the amazing things that you've been going out and achieving with your new books. And thank you for all the amazing work that you are doing to inspire other women. It's incredible. So thank you again for coming back on the Tough Girl podcast to speak to us.
Thank you very much, Sarah. It's such an honour, and have a lovely summer. I know you've got lots of adventures planned, so thank you.
Hey Tribe, I really hope you enjoyed the episode with Jo Moseley. She's just such a wonderful woman, and it's always super fun to catch up with her. I always seem to catch up with Jo at the National Outdoor Expo, which is held in March at the NEC in Birmingham. It's always great just to see what she's been up to and what she's been achieving. I'm just so proud of her most recent book, just such an incredible achievement. So like we mentioned on that podcast episode, we have spoken with Jo before, and that episode came out on May 19th, 2020. So during the episode, Jo shares more about her experiences with menopause and perimenopause, and how exercise helped her both physically and mentally, and how she began to incorporate more of it into her life. She also shares more about the first time that she picked up a paddleboard for the first time, and how she had no idea where it would lead. Since then, she went on to become the first woman to stand up paddleboard. So SUP, 162 miles, so 260 kilometres from coast to coast, Liverpool to Goole across Great Britain. She talks more about self-confidence, dealing with grief, living her dreams, joy, and learning to be proud of herself. So please do go and give that episode a listen. You will not regret it. Everything that we have talked about today will be available in the show notes at toughgirlchallenges.com. So please do go and check out the website. There's a lot of episodes available for you to listen to. There's over 700 episodes now in the back catalogue going back to 2015. And I've also created a page on the website called Resources, where it's broken down into ultra endurance challenges, swimmers, through hikers, ultra runners, runners up to marathons, climbers, mountaineers, 7 summiteers, is that even a word? 7 summit climbers, polar explorers, ocean rowers. We've also spoken to women specifically about being mothers and pregnancy. We've spoken to adaptive athletes, wheelchair adventurers. We talk about specific challenges such as Marathon des Sables or Mount Aconcagua. We've spoken to skiers and snowboarders, sailors, world travellers, explorers and expedition leaders, scientists and researchers. There is a lot of content on there, so I would encourage you, if you are looking for something in your life and you're not quite sure what it is, continue listening to episodes of the Tough Girl podcast. Even if you think, look, I know I'm never going to go and climb the highest mountain in the world, or I'm never going to row an ocean, or I'm never going to go and explore the North Pole or South Pole. That is absolutely fine. Totally get that. But what I would say is sometimes it's not about the challenge. It's what the women have learned from taking on these challenges. That's what you can learn from. You can learn from their experiences, their top tips and advice. So please do go and check it out. And if you've enjoyed this episode, I would love for you to share it on social media. Tag me at Tough Girl Challenges on Instagram or Facebook. If you could tell one friend about the Tough Girl podcast, I would be very, very grateful, as that is how we get the message out there. Thank you again for listening. Thank you again for all of your support. If you are in a position to financially support, then please do visit Patreon, www.patreon.com/a tough girl podcast, and you can help to support the mission to increase the amount of female role models in the media, especially in relation to adventure and physical challenges. All that's left for me to say is, wherever you are, whatever you are doing, give it your all, give it 110%, get after it, go for it, believe in yourself, because I believe in you. Take care, lots of love, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.